On the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean, the ideas of the French and American revolutions were embraced by the oppressed people there. Hispaniola had both French and Spanish colonies, with the French colony of Saint Domingue being one of the most productive of all the European colonies in the Caribbean. During the American Revolution, French support had meant that the gens de couleur, or free people of color, had been sent to aid the American colonists. The white colonists in Saint Domingue took advantage of the opportunity created by the French Revolution to establish their own government, but they did not concede any rights to the gens de couleur, nor to any of the large slave population. So naturally, they were pretty ticked off about this. In 1791, a guy named Boukman was a voodoo priest, and he led a slave revolt that ignited the struggle into a full-scale civil war. Many former or escaped slaves, known as Maroons, joined in the revolt. Boukman ended up dying, but his revolt did not. Francois Dominique Toussaint then rose to lead the slave revolt, and by 1797 he controlled most of the island, and by 1801 he had created a constitution that granted equality and citizenship to all residents of the colony. Although Toussaint did not declare independence from France, in 1803 his successors did, and on January 1st, 1804, the new nation of Haiti became the second independent republic in the Western Hemisphere. As for Toussaint, invading French forces took him in 1802, and he died in French jail in 1803. Nevertheless, his name is synonymous with slave revolts and with the fight for human rights among repressed peoples everywhere. So quickly, we're going to talk about the Latin American revolutions that happened. A struggle for independence in Latin American countries also followed in the wake of the French Revolution. France invaded Spain and Portugal in 1807, which weakened French power and inspired revolution in their colonies. The revolutions of the early 19th century, however, did not bring independence to the common people, but instead succeeded in strengthening the white Creole elite, as well as their European traditions of Roman Catholicism and slavery. So, in Gran Colombia, after his stay in Jamaica, Simón Bolívar continued his attempts to unify Latin America. He moved to Haiti, and then with the help of Haitian soldiers, to whom Bolívar promised he would abolish slavery there, Bolívar seized Angostura in Venezuela, and then he went on to lead victorious revolutions for independence in Colombia and Ecuador. In 1821, the Republic of Gran Colombia was formed, and this included Venezuela, present-day Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, and northern Peru, and Bolívar was the president. He then fully liberated Peru, and in 1824, the Peruvian Congress named him dictator of Peru. The following year, the Republic of Bolivia was created, named after Bolívar. However, he was ultimately unable to maintain control of this large region that Gran Colombia included, and by 1826, internal divisions and differences sparked dissent throughout the nation, and regional uprisings erupted. His vision of creating a federation among the newly independent Latin American republics, modeled after the United States, with a government that recognized and upheld the rights of individual citizens, ultimately failed. And in 1830, he resigned as president of Gran Colombia, and it broke apart. In Mexico, Miguel de Hidalgo led a rebellion against the Spanish in 1810. The white inhabitants of European ancestry, the Creoles, executed Hidalgo, and later a Creole general named Augustin de Iturbide conquered the capital and named himself emperor. Although he declared Mexico's independence, other Creoles deposed him later and declared a republic. Shortly thereafter, the southern regions of the Spanish Empire and Mexico declared independence and formed the Central American Federation. It split in 1838 into Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. And then a guy named Benito Juarez attempted to curtail the influence of the church and of the military in Mexico. And he, in the Constitution of 1857, he limited the privileges of priests and other elite members of society. Church properties were actually confiscated, and Mexicans gained liberties like freedom of speech and universal manhood suffrage. Juarez was a native Mexican, but not a Creole, and he intended his reforms to benefit the native Mexicans. However, his Creoles bought much of the confiscated church lands, and more than 95% of Mexican peasants remained landless. The French invasion of Portugal in 1807 had driven the royal family into exile in Brazil. Portuguese King Dom Juan the Sixth lived in Brazil, which became the center of royal power. And although the king returned to Portugal in 1821, his son Pedro stayed behind as regent. Revolution erupted only 1 year later, and Pedro disobeyed his father's command to return home, and eventually revolutionaries established him as Emperor Pedro I. So of all the Latin American countries, Brazil alone remained under control of a monarchy. Creole leaders in Argentina managed to exploit and oppress native populations, where regional military leader Juan Manuel de Rosas put down rebellions through brutal means. He ruled as a despot, but he did succeed in establishing a centralized government in Argentina. And then the Maroon Society. Some slaves in Latin America also resisted the colonial government, especially in Brazil and the Caribbean. Runaway slaves who fled the plantations established their own communities. And in the Caribbean, those Maroon Societies, often located in remote areas in the mountains of Jamaica and Hispaniola and in the islands of the Guineas. Initially intended to provide havens for future escaped slaves, some of the Maroon Societies eventually were granted independence from their colonial rulers.